Thanks, Brad. Hi, everybody. I'm Megan from All Chicago Making Homelessness History. A little bit about our organization. We're the Continuum of Care lead for Chicago for homelessness prevention. So we actually work with a lot of partner agencies. There's probably at least 90 that we work with just in Chicago. Our whole Salesforce implementation started at the beginning of the pandemic when there was a need to get people out of overcrowded shelters. And so we came up with a program to engage. Also, people weren't like renting new apartments. So there were a lot of landlords with apartments and people who needed to get into apartments to kind of make the shelters safer so they weren't overcrowded. And so we started a program called Chicago Rents to engage landlords to kind of relax some of their restrictions on rental and to accept tenants who may have had evictions, credit issues, not regular income, things like that, which normally when you go apply for an apartment, those are the first three things that a landlord looks for. So, and in exchange, we guaranteed paid federal funds, case management, a support team and all that. So we started having a team of landlord engagement coordinators who are reaching out to landlords, describing the program, getting them to sign memorandums of understanding, and needing to track information about all that. And we picked Salesforce as our system of choice for this, and with the intention of using it mostly as a CRM to manage information about landlords. And as it went on, we've been kind of slowly building onto it. It became a way to not only track the landlords and the contacts for the landlords, but also information about those apartments and where they were in the process of requirements. Did they meet the fair market rent from HUD? Did they meet rent reasonableness? Were they inspected? Because there's a requirement that the apartments get inspected so somebody doesn't try to rent out an apartment that doesn't have the toilet doesn't flush and it's not safe or things like that. So we're kind of responsible for doing all that. And so to track all that information, we started building out custom objects in Salesforce to track those apartments. We call them units. And then also starting to track the participants or clients who end up getting matched with those units. And eventually we ended up bringing in Outbound Funds Module. And we actually, because it got to the point where we were paying rent for 1,000, eventually 1,500 apartments a month. And we were responsible for doing that. And it was still in a spreadsheet. So we did Outbound Funds Module, and we actually used that, use funding requests to approve. There's a very hardy approval process where it has to be approved by 2 people from the agency, 2 people from our internal team before a rent gets paid. So it was managing all that. So we weren't trying to use a spreadsheet to manage paying, up to 1,500 landlords a month. And a part of the Chicago Rents program is also we've had these events called accelerated moving events, where the partner agencies go to an event. It could be at a shelter, it could be at an encampment, something like that. And they actually meet with their clients and show them our inventory of apartments and then apply in real time. And then we start that leasing process of getting the person approved and paying the deposits or the move-in fees and getting documents signed and collecting those documents. So for a long time, even though we had the information about all the units in Salesforce, the only people who could get into Salesforce were our internal staff. So last year in November, and we've worked with Bigger Boat on all of this, we launched Communities Experience Cloud portal, where now in real time, the case managers are able to be at an AME and sit down with their participant, look at a live list of the units, filter them based on criteria, like does the person need an elevator? Do they need, will they fail a background check? Some things like that. And then be able to actually apply for an apartment. And then in our system, it actually automatically up and takes it out of the available pool. So I was going to demo that a little bit. And I'm working in our dev environment where there's a bunch of fake information. So let me try to present, and I'm going to do a window. There we go. Okay. Looks like it's trying. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
That's great.
All right, great. So I can show you, here's what our Salesforce looks like roughly. So we're using accounts and contacts for the landlords. We have a couple different record types for accounts. We have one for our partner organizations as well. And then we have one for landlords. And so we have landlord accounts and partner organization accounts. And then we use contacts. And then a lot of this other stuff is going to be the custom stuff. So units we have are all the apartments. And payees are actually who we pay. It's kind of like who the W-9 is, because it's not necessarily that a landlord or a property management company only has one payee for their apartments. So the payee or the W-9 is attached to the apartment. And then we have the participants. We also have a lease record, which tracks some information about the lease start, end date, lease status, where it is in the leasing process. And then we're using objects from Outbound Funds Module, so funding requests. We also have recurring funding requests because we actually set those funding requests up at the beginning of the lease we set up. And this is something that Kevin at Bigger Boat wrote an automation for this. We can do, when we create a lease, we can create 24 monthly rent payments that go out 24 months into the future. So they're already in queue to be approved and paid when it comes time for them to be approved and paid. We also are now using cases too. So those are the objects that we're using. But if I log into we call it the Rapid Rehousing Hive. If I log into that as a case manager, they get a home page where they can see just what we've allowed them to see. So they can see just available units. So in order for them to be able to see it, it has to be flagged with a checkbox and a couple other things in our system. They don't see everything we have. They don't see apartments that were already selected and somebody's living in, unless it's their participant, their client who's actually living in it. They can see that then, but they can't see our whole inventory. They can only see what's available. And they can also see their list of participants. So if I go to participants, I can see these are the ones that are assigned to the case manager I'm logged in as. They can see the leases for their participant, and then they can also see their cases. And what we're using cases for, this is the most recent thing we launched, is relocations, because sometimes there will be a need for people to be relocated. Common situations are habitability issues, like something needs to be fixed and the landlord hasn't fixed it or isn't fixing it. And so we will relocate them, and they get to select a new unit. We will move them once it gets approved by our staff. And also, like if it's a VAWA, like if somebody has a restraining order and the person finds them, they have to be relocated within a certain amount of time. So we've used that. And this is actually, before, our relocation cases used to be like in a Trello, and stuff would just sit there for a long time. So this has really sped it up, that they have the ability to now come into the portal and request a relocation case for their participant. And then our team reviews it, and once we approve it, then they can go in and they can pick a new unit for that client. So I'm going to show you a little bit how the units search works. So we have this really cool filter that we call like Zappos shopping in here. So if you know what the person needs, so let's say I'm meeting with a participant and we know that they need an elevator or they need a wheelchair accessible shower, you can actually go in and filter on those accessibility features and then see what in our inventory that's available is one of those. And let's say, okay, the person needs a 1-bedroom. We have 2 options here and it shows the address. And let's say, okay, one is 1,400 and one's 1,200. Well, 1,200 is a better match for them for their income. The case manager can actually click over and see all of the data about the unit. They can see like whether it requires an ID or a social security number, if the landlord's willing to include utilities. So a lot of the things that we need to know about it. There is also a link when they're meeting with their client that they can show pictures of the apartment. So what we actually have them do, and we have a process built out where we don't want 2 people showing the same apartment at the same time. So we have an ability to put it on hold. So I can put it on hold. And I can use our HMIS, our HUD ID for the client, and I can choose this participant and I can put it on hold. And that means it takes it out of the list of viewable units. So because this is happening in real time and it's a big event, we had problems before where we would send a list and people would be showing the same apartment at the same time. So this prevents that from happening. So now the case manager can, at their leisure, you can see it's marked on hold and it's marked on hold for this participant, can click on the pictures and walk through the pictures, look at the map and do all of that for the unit. And these links can be anywhere. They can go to either, it can be pictures that were sent to us and we uploaded and there's a link to those. It can be a listing on the apartment management company's website, but we just link to some kind of images so they can sit through. And then if the participant says, yes, I want this one, or no, they don't, they can go back in and they can either release it so that they can find another unit or they can select it and move forward with it. So they can say, okay, I went to the link for the rental application, I filled it out for my participant, and now we're selecting it. And when it does this, it confirms all the information. Finished. And so now actually there's a lease and it actually creates a lease record in our system. So we used to have staff doing this manually. Afterwards, we'd get the list of this participant, pick this one, and our staff would have to go in and say, okay, this participant, this unit, let's create a lease and do that manually. Well, now it happens automatically. And so then you can see it's the status is pending and it's pending approval. And then we'll take it through a bunch of different statuses. We'll get like whether then now it's time for an inspection or it's time for a lease signing. We go through a bunch of processes. And also for a participant, let's say on this one, let's say they had moved in and it becomes an active lease and they're in there. This is where we would do a relocation request from the actual participant. So the case manager could come in, they can search for their participant, they can bring them up, and then they can do a relocation request. And it fills out, it asks which lease we're going to relocate them from. And then it's going to ask for a bunch of information that's required. General reason, it'll ask for some specific forms, and there's some logic built into this so that it gives us all the information we need to be able to approve or reject a relocation request. And then once that gets done, it would create a case. I'm not going to go through all this. And then we can go through and we can review and approve. We can also send comments back and forth through the portal. And it just really has streamlined our ability and sped up our ability to house people more quickly and rehouse people more quickly, actually, with the relocations. Does anybody have any questions?
I did, Megan. I'm sure others will, but that very, very cool demo. Thanks so much for showing that. A lot of questions actually, but one kind of off the top is, So to what extent that faceted search and that filtering capacity, I'm not that familiar with the latest iteration of experiences or communities. How much of that was sort of out of the box, or how much of that UI that you showed us was sort of custom? In particular, that search where you filtered down by the criteria for the units, was that sort of native, or did that have to be kind of a custom build?
That's a good question. Brad, do you know? Because Kevin did it for us. Because at first it was just like a list view, and there was like a list view created for like 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, and so. And we're like, we don't like this, and it was Kate from Bigger Boat who came up with the term for Zappos, because we were like, this is what we want. And
yeah, right. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, so everything that Megan's shown is either kind of native core Experience Cloud, because you can see the standard Salesforce pages and the standard list view pages. There are some screen flows that you could see as she was doing some of those like lease reassignment things.
Yeah.
But that search is actually out of the box. It's I don't know exactly what the feature is called, but basically sometimes you can click into advanced search, and basically we just Kevin figured out how to do a link to that advanced search page, so it kind of gives you those preset filters off to the left hand side, because they wanted to do advanced search, but we didn't want to build a Lightning Web Component or do something really custom. So I'll find out exactly the feature name that we used to do that, but it was kind of I'll call it a hack, but it's just basically figuring out the right place to link into Salesforce.
That's great. So you leverage that native, and then those, like you said, the Zappos mod. I love that, Megan. Like people will say, "Oh, like I can on Zappos, I can pick these attributes and filter dynamically." Oh, that's very cool. And then Brad, I think you just answered, but those other elements, those were screen flows, those kind of multi-step reallocation or requesting. Those were screen flows. Great. So you didn't need any external form tool or anything. It's all native Salesforce flows, and then Experience Cloud, but no external form tool.
Nope.
Great.
I mean, I think, you've in some other areas they use form assembly, but not in what Megan demonstrated. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. And for some of this, go ahead, Megan.
I think now that we have the Experience Cloud and we're using this, at some point we're going to migrate those into Experience Cloud instead of sending people into places. But we had to get to that tipping point of where, versus just having like a link of a form that somebody fills out and then it goes into our Salesforce. And now that we've exposed things outside,
right.
Now we've drank the Kool-Aid. So
that's great. And then one other question, Megan, in terms of visibility, I think you said the case managers in this case can see their caseload sort of. So someone on your team is assigning those folks, and then they have visibility just to those people, so they can't see other folks' caseloads. Is that sort of the visibility security model? Okay.
So the structure is there's like a supervisor at the agency, and then there's case managers. The supervisor can actually log in and see all of their case managers' caseloads, and they can reassign them in the Hive, which is very helpful, because sometimes, we do get a list. We use Apsona and import the list of case manager. I love Apsona. And import them like ahead of time. So like the day before an AME, we'll get the list and then we just import it. And sometimes if they're organized and they've given us which actual case manager it is, otherwise we just import them all under the supervisor, and then the supervisor goes in and moves them around, and also is able to, like, if the next morning a case manager is sick, they can adjust the caseload themselves. They can also go in for, like if a case manager leaves, they can go in and reassign, existing participants. So that's helped us out a lot too, because we were doing a lot of internal admin work doing that.
That's great. I don't know.
I think we have like 120 plus users with the experience licenses now. So we're managing a lot.
That's great. That's great. I don't know, Megan, if you and Brad, you see Will's comment there, but really impressed in terms compared to HMIS systems.
So Will used to work with us. So Will was on our all Chicago team and is familiar with bigger boats.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
That's great.
The neat thing I think about this project is like we were in a sense sort of building the airplane as it was being flown by all Chicago, because basically the program launched and they realized fairly quickly we need a system to start to track this. But the program was like they were defining the program as we were building it out. And so one of the neat things is we sort of just started with, okay, what is core? Okay, great. These are the core problems to solve, and then continue to sort of grow and evolve it from there and really learn. Again, sort of the first step at a quote portal was doing some advanced form assembly work, which worked well. But then at some point it was like, okay, we've outgrown this. The scale's too much. Let's invest the next step in Experience Cloud, which is, a different level of investment than just doing form assembly. But by not necessarily jumping to Experience Cloud first, like I feel like the team learned a lot along the way about what was most important, what was valuable. And then I think also like bringing the partners along, because I think that's sometimes the hardest part about a process like that. Like it's one thing to get your internal users and train them on Salesforce, but it's different when you have 120 case managers logging into the system. So Megan, I don't know if you want to tell a little bit about how you work with them and how you train them on the system.
So we have, we were doing like when we first launched it and we were kind of doing an AME every couple of weeks or something. We were doing like live training with the partners, but we ended up recording some of those. We have a manual, so like a PDF documentation, and then we were doing live training, but we recorded those and we ended up putting those in. We have like a training management system, an LMS. And we ended up putting it in there, and so we can assign it to the case managers, and they don't get their invite to the Hive until they complete it. So they've at least had to go through and like watch the video and mark it completed and everything before they do that. We also do have some staff at the AMEs to help support that as well. But the thing is, like most of them love it, and they have been asking us for more and more and more stuff. So actually, the most recent thing that we launched was that they can go in and they can see all their payment requests, like the status of those for the rent for all their participants, because for auditing, they actually have to keep that documentation. And so we were also getting a lot of requests like, oh, I forgot to print out my online form assembly form when I approved it. And so can you send me a PDF of it or whatever? And so now we made it so they can actually go in and see, they can either see like, was the rent for this person paid this month? Was it paid last month? I need to pull up the invoice for the one from July of last year. They can go in and do it themselves. So it gives them a lot more visibility into the data that we're keeping anyway.
That's great. And you have, as my understanding, I've only followed communities, now experiences, but you have very granular control over what you expose both on the object level, field, and then by user, right? So
yes,
that's great. That's
yeah.
great.
Yeah, and there were a couple little like tricky gotcha things too. Like I think there was some stuff we went back and forth about like record owners, because sometimes we wanted that exposed and sometimes we didn't.
Right.
Because we do use a system where the record owner is kind of the one who's responsible for actions. And we have a lot of like my reports and my list views,
right? Yeah,
use kind of as to-do lists or things like that. So, so it, like for instance, like a landlord engagement coordinator is the owner of a landlord account, and we wanted to expose that because we wanted the case manager to know if they're having a problem with the landlord, who to reach out to.
Yeah, makes sense. That's great. I think Will's asks a question here in the chat about quantification of efficiency and effectiveness of the Hive. Maybe in terms of hour management, kind of time saved, that sort of thing. Sounds like you've offset a lot of calls or questions through exposing data, but.
Yeah, so Will, we haven't really run that yet. I mean, our feedback is that yes, it's saving them a lot of time, and they are coming back with ideas. It's great when we have some who are like real power users and are like, well, if this is here, you could also do this, and so we're fielding like those requests as well. We did have an internal meeting in the past week when we were talking about like, is it actually helping us house people more successfully or more quickly? And so I did like a report that showed like how many leases become like active leases where people actually move to an apartment. And it is trending up since November, which is great. And so I said we're going to take the win on that and
Sure.
save cause by life.
Nice. And Sherry, I think maybe it has analogous experience in New York City. It sounds like Center for NYC Neighborhoods. And right, Sherry, you're saying it nice to see kind of similar features, functionality. Is that?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so we did the homeowner assistance fund program.
Nice.
For New York State, and we also leverage the funding requests for disbursements of payments, and also the Experience Cloud for the participant side. So everyone who applied got a license to be able to check the status of their application.
Wow, nice. Very similar model, it sounds like. Yeah, that's that's great. All right, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, we actually use Salesforce also for State Homelessness Prevention Fund. And we use, and that kind of it's a separate app within our Salesforce, and they submit that's another one where they submit their application through Form Assembly, and it comes into Salesforce. And we also do the same thing for Student Emergency Fund. We have a fund where we give out money to students for mostly like one-time expenses, like help with tuition or books or things like that. So we're doing all those through Salesforce now.
And you do outbound funds for all of those, or some of those? Okay.
Different record types of funding requests, and we use that for all of them. So they go through like a different approval process for each of those. They even have like different fields on each one because it's different criteria and different information we have to collect.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for doing this, and for Brad this is great, and Megan, thank you so much for jumping on here, and this was really interesting, and it's great that we have some analogous experience here, and then you have, I guess, a former colleague in Will jumped on, but that's really interesting use of Experience Cloud, and then the role of form assembly or not, in some of these constellations is interesting. Outbound funds, it's really impressive, and the work seems great.